Also in the UK, King Charles III has made his youngest brother, Prince Edward, the Duke of Edinburgh. The title was last held by their father, Prince Philip, from 1947 until his death in 2021.
For years, King Charles operated under an assumption that seemed completely reasonable to him. He was king. He had granted his brother the title. He had the authority to restructure the family however modernization required. He had the final say. On March 25, 2026, he received a document from his own legal team that told him, in writing, that he absolutely did not. And the person who proved it wasn't a politician. It wasn't the press. It wasn't even Princess Anne, though she played a role that stopped a room cold. It was Prince Edward, the quiet one, the youngest, the brother who spent decades staying out of scandal, doing the work, paying his own way, and keeping every single receipt. Every single one. Because Edward saw this coming, and when the moment arrived, when the institution that had given him everything tried to take the most important parts of it back, he didn't argue. He didn't leak. He didn't give a tell-all interview. He opened a file, and the palace backed down. This is that story. What Queen Elizabeth locked in before she left. To understand what happened on March 25, 2026, you need to understand what Queen Elizabeth II did in her final years, and why she did it deliberately. She had watched the family change. She had watched pressure build around money, titles, and control. She had seen how the institution moved against people it no longer found useful, and she knew exactly what she wanted secured before she was gone. The Duke of Edinburgh title was going to Edward. That was not up for debate. The title had defined Prince Philip for more than 70 years. It was his life's role, and Elizabeth made sure it would pass to the one son who had stayed steady, stayed out of scandal, and never brought harm to the monarchy. That promise was fulfilled in April 2023, when Charles officially handed Edward the title. But the title was only half of what Elizabeth intended Edward to have. The other half was Bagshot Park, the estate. And the letter Philip witnessed, Bagshot Park is not just a house. It is a 120-room Tudor Gothic mansion sitting on 51 acres inside Windsor Great Park. It is the historic seat of the dukedom. In her final years, Elizabeth signed a letter of intent tying that estate directly to the Edinburgh title for Edward's lifetime, and that letter was witnessed by Prince Philip as he was dying. Philip saw this coming. He knew that without that document, Edward would be vulnerable, that the institution could, in time, separate the title from the property and leave his youngest son with a name but no foundation. So Philip put his name on the document as he was dying to make it harder for that to happen. That detail matters enormously because this wasn't just Elizabeth's decision, it was both of theirs. Two monarchs, one reigning and one consort, choosing to protect their youngest son in writing with witnesses before they were gone. What Edward actually built. Here is what most people don't know about Bagshot Park, and what made the attempt to take it back so specifically indefensible. When the estate was offered to Edward under a lease signed in March 1998, it was in poor condition. The building was worn out, outdated, and had been ignored for years after the army chaplain who'd occupied it left in 1996. The Crown Estate didn't even want to keep it as a royal residence. There were serious plans to turn it into a hotel or conference center. Instead, it was leased to Edward. The terms: £5,000 a year for 50 years, low rent, heavy burden. He had to fix the place. Not slowly, not over time, but immediately. He did it. Edward invested $1.36 million of his own private money into the restoration. Money he had earned himself before becoming a full-time working royal. The total cost of repairs reached nearly $3 million. The Crown Estate covered part of it. Edward carried the rest personally. Once the work was done, his rent was increased to £90,000 a year. The National Audit Office confirmed that as market value. And in 2007, Edward paid $5 million through his company to extend the lease to 150 years. That extension gave him the right to sell the lease and keep the profit. Long-term thinking. Personal financial commitment. Everything done properly. Documented. Agreed by the institution. By 2026, that same property was worth approximately £30 million. If the Crown estate got it back, it could be sold or leased for enormous profit. When pressure started building on Edward to give it up, the financial motive was sitting right there in plain sight. The jewelry audit that was never just about jewelry. Before the lawyers arrived with their documents, something else happened. A palace official showed up at Edward and Sophie's household with a clipboard and a quiet instruction. The visit came from the office of Queen Camilla. It was framed as a jewelry audit, a routine review, a national heritage check. What it actually meant was simple. Someone had come to question jewelry that Sophie, Duchess of Edinburgh, had worn as her own for 25 years. The piece at the center of the audit was the anthem tiara. This was not a random item from a vault. It was made specifically for Sophie's wedding in 1999, commissioned by Queen Elizabeth II herself. It was built using 4 antique elements, a honeysuckle design taken from the private collection of Queen Victoria. For nearly 2 decades, it was the only tiara Sophie ever wore. That detail matters more than it might seem. Sophie was never given open access to the grand state tiaras the way other senior royals were. That was understood inside the family. She stayed in a lower position, closer to the margins, and the anthem tiara became her one piece, her one crown. Camilla's argument arrived through legal lingua. Because the tiara incorporated golden stones from Queen Victoria's era, it could be classified as crown property, meaning it should be held in the central royal vault and only issued for official use. The message behind the argument was sharp. Sophie would no longer own the tiara she wore on her wedding day. She would have to ask permission to wear it. And the logic, if accepted, was dangerous, because it didn't stop with one tiara. It opened the door to reclaiming dozens of personal gifts given by Elizabeth across her 70-year reign. Edward's legal team saw that immediately. They also saw something else. The deed that ended the argument, Edward's lawyers responded with a document that shut down the jewelry claim at its root. A deed of gift signed by Elizabeth in 1999, stating clearly that the anthem tiara was classified as a private wedding present, not a state loan, not a shared asset, not something held in trust. It belonged to Sophie. Elizabeth had also awarded Sophie the Royal Victorian Order, an honor given personally by the monarch for direct service, not a casual gesture, a deliberate statement of trust. And Edward had gone further than anyone realized. In 1999, working with royal jewelers, he had created a matching set of black and white pearl jewelry for Sophie, a necklace and earrings designed specifically to complement the anthem tiara. The materials were funded through the crown, but Edward held the design rights. His lawyers argued the tiara and the pearl set formed a single artistic unit tied to Edward's own design work. You cannot separate the tiara from that unit, which adds another layer of legal protection nobody had anticipated. There was something else behind all of this, something personal. Sophie lost her mother when she was young. Over the years, Queen Elizabeth II became the closest thing she had to a mother figure. There was a moment at a Buckingham Palace reception in 2019. Sophie was mid-speech in front of senior royals when she turned toward Elizabeth and said simply, "Mama." It was unplanned. It slipped out in a room where every word is usually carefully controlled. It showed exactly how she saw her. The woman who signed that deed of gift was the woman she called her mother. And now another woman was trying to take that away. The dossier and the threat. By the afternoon of March 25, 2026, the situation reached a breaking point. Edward's legal team delivered a direct warning. If the claim on the tiara was not dropped by end of day, they would release private letters written by Elizabeth, letters that clearly stated her wish for Sophie to keep full ownership of her personal jewelry. And those letters, according to those close to the situation, did not stop there. They included words about Camilla, about the long, cold distance Elizabeth had maintained toward her, about the tension that had never fully disappeared, about the years it took before any form of acceptance came, and how that acceptance looked from the inside. Charles had spent years carefully rebuilding Camilla's public image, turning her from the most unpopular figure in British public life into queen consort. Those letters could destroy that work in a single day. This was no longer about a tiara or a house. It was about control, reputation, legacy, and Edward had just placed all of it on the table. When Princess Anne walked into the room, by the time Princess Anne walked into the private meeting with Charles that afternoon, the legal argument was already effectively over. But Anne hadn't come to argue the law. She had come to say something else. She went straight to the point. No small talk. No softening. She told Charles that if he allowed private gifts from their mother to be questioned, reclassified, or taken back, then the word of a monarch meant nothing, and then she delivered the line that stopped the room. If our mother's signature on a lease or a deed of gift is not worth the paper it's written on today, then your signature will be worth even less tomorrow. That was not a legal argument. That was an attack on the foundation. A king's authority only functions if people trust what he has signed. That trust doesn't start with him. It flows from every monarch before him. Break that chain and everything weakens. Every promise, every agreement, every title granted. Anne had also reviewed the Bagshot Park documents herself. She knew exactly what Edward had paid, what he had signed, and what the Crown Estate had formally accepted. Her position was direct. Edward paid for that home. The Crown Estate took his money under those terms. That agreement stands. She didn't treat the tiara and the house as separate disputes. She made clear they were the same fight. Both were things Elizabeth had personally given, backed by signed documents, with witnesses. And both were now being challenged using identical logic. If they succeed in taking one, they open the door to the other. Once that door is open, nothing Elizabeth signed is safe. The personal layer Anne brought, there was a dimension to Anne's intervention that went beyond strategy. She had been watching a pattern she recognized. She was close to Diana. She had watched how Diana's position was slowly broken down. The removal of her Royal Highness status, the isolation, the withdrawal of institutional support. She had watched a woman give everything to the monarchy and then get pushed to the margins piece by piece. Now she was watching pressure build again. Different person. Same pattern. He was not going to stay quiet this time. She also understood what was at stake personally for Sophie. Sophie had lost her mother young. Elizabeth had become the closest thing she had to a mother. Anne had lost both her parents. Philip in 2021, Elizabeth in 2022. She knew what it meant when those connections were gone, and only the things they left behind remained. When the tiara and the home were being targeted, Anne didn't see paperwork. She saw something being taken from someone who had already lost enough, and she said so. She then went further. She told Charles that if Camilla didn't stop, she would act. Not privately, publicly. She would oversee a full audit of the Queen's household. Not basic numbers, everything. Expenses, staffing, allocations tied to Queen Camilla's office directly. That threat landed hard, because Anne is the one person in the family who could make it real and be believed. She has a decades-long record of discipline and financial accountability. If she says she will expose something, people listen. She also addressed the quiet pressure that had been building on Edward's children, James, Earl of Wessex, and Lady Louise Windsor, to move into full private status earlier than they or their parents had chosen. Anne shut that down immediately. That decision belongs to the children and their parents, not to Queen Camilla's office. What Charles's own lawyers told him, after reviewing Edward's full legal dossier, Charles's own legal team delivered their conclusion. Edward's position was virtually unbreakable. Every piece held. The original lease, the letter signed by Elizabeth and witnessed by Philip. 20 years of financial records proving Edward had maintained the estate at a level that saved the monarchy money. The deed of gift for the tiara. The design rights to the matching pearl set. No royal order could override it. What his mother had given Edward was not temporary. It was a legacy, inheritance. And it was out of Charles's reach. And then there was the Philip detail. The letter witnessed at the end of Philip's life. Charles knew his mother had always protected Edward. He knew where her loyalty sat, but he had not known that Philip, in his final days, had formally backed that protection in writing. Both of them, together. A deliberate, documented decision. Charles had lost this fight before he started. The note that arrived that evening. Late on March 25, 2026, a formal note was sent from the office of the Master of the Jewel House to Sophie, Duchess of Edinburgh. Short, direct, no emotion, no explanation, no apology for the audit or the pressure. The Anthem tiara would remain under her exclusive private control. At the same time, the review of Bagshot Park was quietly closed. The official wording described it as recognition of the Edinburgh household's role in maintaining the estate. Inside the palace, no one misunderstood what had just happened. The crown had stepped back. Everything Prince Edward held was confirmed. The title, the home, the tiara. Exactly where Queen Elizabeth II had placed it. And that confirmation became a record. That note will sit in the archives long after everyone involved is gone. When it is read in the future, it will be clear what it means. A claim was made, it failed, and the institution was forced to admit it in writing. The divide that is now fixed. The outcome didn't bring peace. The relationship between Charles and Edward has changed permanently. What the public will see going forward is unity. Two brothers at events, professional and correct. What everyone inside the family will know is different. One of them had to use the law to protect himself from the other. That doesn't go away. And the structure of the monarchy has shifted in a way that cannot be reversed. There are now two clear centers of gravity. At Buckingham Palace, Charles and Camilla pushing their vision of a controlled, centralized monarchy. Away from that center, Princess Anne, Prince Edward, and Sophie, supported quietly by William and Catherine. They are not operating loudly, but they are holding a line, protecting what was built before it, refusing to allow it to be rewritten. For Edward's children, this moment will not be forgotten. They watched their father fight without public drama, without leaks, without drama of any kind. He did it through documents, through preparation, through the quiet discipline of someone who saw the fight coming years before it arrived. And he forced the system to back down. Charles has his monarchy, he has his structure, he has his authority. But what he doesn't have anymore is the full trust of the brother who stayed quiet for decades, paid his own way, and asked for nothing except to keep what was given to him. That loss doesn't show on paper, but it will show over time. Now I want to hear from you. Do you think Edward was right to draw such a hard legal line, or should family matters like this stay out of the lawyer's hands? Drop your take in the comments. I read every single one. If this breakdown gave you the full picture on something the mainstream coverage barely touched, hit the like button. It genuinely helps this channel. And subscribe if you haven't yet, because we go through the documents, follow the paper trail, and go all the way to the end. See you in the next one.